Hey, Austin, how you doing?
Hey, Dad, how are you?
I'm doing good. It's good to be with you again and to have some time to share our heart with our listeners. And before we get into this week's conversation, we've had three unbelievable weeks, in my opinion, with Matt Sherwood, Coach Jones and his son Chandler, and then we topped it off with Mark Richt and his son John. I know I've had a lot of interesting responses from people. I've had people shed some tears, how they were touched and moved. I had people that talked about their story relating in one way or another. What were some of the things that you took from those different podcasts over the last 3 weeks, and maybe some of the things you've heard from people?
Well, I just think for me, anytime, it's just a good reminder of the power of a person's story. And it's been really enjoyable to look at, three unique, really five unique stories, and seeing the fingerprints of God and just little nuggets of wisdom that each person brought to the table. And, um, just seeing some of their vulnerability and was really encouraging, I know, for me. So I can only imagine what it was like as some of the listeners listened to those past three podcasts.
It was interesting, and I've shared this, I think, a couple times over the last 10 podcasts, which is hard to believe we've done 10. Wow. Can't believe that. When we first started talking about doing a podcast, I thought, who are they kidding with me and you?
Oh, goodness.
So 10 are in the past, and we're moving forward for the 11th. But what I was going to say is I am continually encouraged. I used to say amazed, and that's really the wrong statement when you're talking about Papa. But, I've been encouraged and reminded that each of these people, and like you said, even in your life, many of these people and those that'll be on in the future as well. But to think how my life or your life ties to them, some of them 30 years ago, and then God brings them back full circle into your life, and to hear their story and maybe how you played a piece of or you played a role in their story. It's just amazing. And it really, I think, encourages you to say, that person in front of you, that's really important, because maybe 20 years from now, that relationship or that encounter you had is going to show up again in some form or fashion. And that just was, it's mind blowing, the tapestry of Papa's story and how he ties our stories within it. It's amazing, isn't it?
Well, I just think it's a good reminder that we all have our unique stories, but they all fit into his story. And I think, I think that's the cool thing about the kingdom is, even though we might live in different states or different countries, or we might have different jobs or different roles, we can all unite as one, seeking the kingdom and getting to know the kingdom and sharing it with the rest of the world.
Yeah, it's just exciting. Like you said, it's exciting to be a part of it and to see what Papa's doing with it and where he's taking it. So I'm looking forward to the next 10, and it's gonna be exciting because he keeps bringing different people into our path. So it's time to move on to this week's conversation, and it's going to be you and I. So let's welcome our listeners to Awaken Kingdom Culture, where hearts and minds come alive, one story at a time. My name is Ken Karcher, and I'll be your host. Alongside me is my son, Austin Karcher, your co-host. Austin, the last time we were together, we continued our discovery into what does it mean to be a kingdom coach. And we looked at a kingdom coach is one who understands their true identity. Who am I in Papa's eyes? How does he see me? As we looked at, and we're going to each week talk about identity And we hammered in 3 points that we want to continue to remind our listeners that as you understand your identity, it gives you great freedom.
Mm.
You're not living for man, but we're learning to live from God and who he says we are and what we already possess. So it's great freedom when we understand our identity. And it allows us to stand firm in our circumstances. You've mentioned many times it's circumstance proof. Now, we don't always live like that, but it is possible. Our circumstances do not define us. We're able to stand firm when life hits us in the face, as we all have at times, and we're able to stand firm. And then the other piece is that grace to fail. We're not under this microscope that we have to do it right all the time. That was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? Trying to do it right. Well, we need to be able to have the grace to fail. That's when we experience the freedom to grow. So we'll talk about identity every week when we talk, to hopefully encourage our people to sense that freedom, stand firm, and remember, you do have the grace to fail, and it's then you'll have the freedom to grow.
The second thing we talked about in regards to being a kingdom coach is we talked about thinking differently. A kingdom coach thinks from a transformational mindset as opposed to a transactional mindset. One that, has great expectancy, as opposed to what most of us have lived our lives with, this great overwhelming expectation. We have the freedom to live with expectancy as opposed to being overwhelmed with, the constant expectation I have to achieve or perform in order to be. Other things that we begin to think differently is, we begin to become more other-centered. We think about how can we give from ourselves and ultimately share the love of Papa. The Papa that we're getting to experience, we have the ability to share it with other people. Also, we're able to think authentically. We're able to be transparent and vulnerable with people, and able to be in the business of restoration as opposed to punishment. We're able, our mind is just, it's shifted. We've made that audible that, we get to carry that kingdom, and that kingdom changes people's lives. And that's exciting. And, instead of focusing on the punishment side of things, we get to have the ability to talk about, the restoration that Jesus has brought to this earth and that we have the ability to walk into.
Well, then we last time together talked about another sense, and that was that kingdom coaches see differently. God's eyes, not the world's eyes. The statement I love to challenge coaches with is, are you a see-througher or a look-atter? Do you only look at the outside or the result, or do you see through? Can you see through the heart? Because a kingdom coach is able to see through performance, and they recognize growth, because we're in the growth industry. And then you gave a great picture of this with the story of a miner, and how a miner doesn't just see the dirt that they're working on. They're able to see the gold nugget that is going to be uncovered as they continue to dig. And that's the same with people. Do we see value and worth with that person in front of us, instead of maybe the behavioral mess that's on the outside, where we all are at times? So seeing differently is critical for a kingdom coach.
So we talked about seeing differently. Well, along the same lines as starting to use our senses, today we're going to focus on hearing differently. A kingdom coach hears differently. That means they listen, discern, and understand. And we're going to get into those and really dig deep and talk about some of those how those show up in our lives when we start living out of the kingdom.
I know when you brought it up, Austin, a couple weeks ago, that you sensed the Spirit talking to you about, hey, Dad, let's address hearing and how we hear differently. I had to shake the cobwebs out of my brain for a little bit because I'm thinking, wow, we're really getting into the deep end of the pool. But the more we got into it, and I think when we continue to talk about this today, it's amazing. I mean, the hearing piece of the puzzle for a kingdom coach, and as we speak to our listeners, it could be anybody, but we talk to the kingdom coach idea. It's really relevant. So thanks for bringing that up. But before we get to that, let's get into the first quarter and talk a little bit more about our identity, because once we mentioned earlier that this is not something that will ever end. We can't get to the bottom of the well. It's going to be just continuing to uncover the riches of his glory within us. And so we opened up, again, I don't know how many weeks ago, but we talked about Papa's opinion of who we are in Christ. And I had a friend who I respect a lot and talk to a lot. He said, Ken, it's really not even opinion. He said, it is truth. It's not just his opinion, but it's his truth about who we are. And then we looked at how we are seen. Think about that, to be seen by the Creator and how he searches us and searched for us in our lostness, and that we're known.
Dad, it's funny you said that. It's just, and this just popped into my mind. Sorry for interrupting you, but I literally walked through this past week. Part of what I was struggling with is, just feeling very alone and feel like, I was actually in the locker room and I was picking up some wrappers off the ground that some of the kids left on the ground. And I'm sitting there, no one else is around. I'm saying, does anyone see me? And then it was in that moment that God reminded me is, Austin, I have seen, known, and searched you. I've walked every step you've walked in. I've been there. I know every emotion and every feeling. So when you brought that up, it was just a good reminder is, we're not out here on this island alone. We might feel that way, but the truth is, he knows us probably better than we even know ourselves.
You made me think of a thought, and I don't think I shared it on a podcast before. I know you've heard it. I've shared it with you. I remember when I got fired at Liberty and we ended up at Fellowship Christian down in Roswell, Georgia. And it was actually the year after you had graduated, and we're getting ready to play our arch rival at the time, Landmark Christian. And we both are having great seasons, which was surprising. And I'm standing on the sideline calling plays. And it was like for the first time in 30 years of coaching, every play was working. and the talent we had, it shouldn't have been. Yeah. And so I'm standing there on that sideline, and I literally looked up to the sky, just like you gave the illustration of the locker room. And I was mad. And I said, I didn't say Pop at the time. I said, Father, why is everything working? And why am I at this place right now where nobody knows me? And there was that pause, and in my spirit, this is what I heard back was, what do you mean no one knows you? He said, I know you, and everyone in the heavenlies know you. Is that enough? And I was like, wow. So yeah. we are known. And a lot of times I think, Austin, people think known means this intellectual consent or assent. And I want to paint the picture. To be known is that intimate love relationship between a husband and a wife. That's how intimate this known is. So we're not just walking around with God saying, hey, I think I know that Austin Karcher guy down there. Now, he intimately knows us, and he knows us in our pain, and he knows us in our triumphs. So great truths of identity. And again, just not truth on paper, it's reality in life. And then we talked about how he 7 times in Genesis 1 creates the world, and he says after each day, it is good. And then he creates man, and he says, it is very good. And so just living from that original goodness that Papa's declared over us, and that we're fearfully and wonderfully made, that we're holy and blameless. Wow, truth.
Mm.
And then that we're a child of God. We're his kids. Then we talked about the masterpiece from Ephesians 3:20, that we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus from the beginning. And then I gave some other verses, Philippians 1:6 and Philippians 2:13, that people can look at. But, when you look in the mirror, do you recognize that you are a masterpiece and that we are his workmanship? There's no mistakes. Listeners, you don't have to beat yourself up and say, I'm unworthy and I got to crawl to him. No. Just like the picture of the prodigal, he's got open arms. He's running to you. And then this week, let's talk about just another thought, another truth, that we are born and adopted as his children. Now, I actually heard that in preparation when we were getting ready to do Mark and John Richt, because those that know the Richt story, we didn't get into it a lot because of time, but, they have 2 adopted children. And when I was preparing for that podcast, I came across, and the guy, I thought, I can't remember who it was, or I'd give him credit, but I thought he said it really well. He said, in Psalms 127, it says that children are a gift from the Lord. So those that are born naturally are a gift that we can receive from God. Each child is a gift. And then he got into talking about adoption, and he said in Ephesians 1:5 that we are chosen by adoption as sons and daughters. A family that chooses to adopt children, which is such a miracle and an act of love. They're choosing you, just like Papa has chosen us before time ever began, so that we could be called sons and daughters. Man, let's just bathe in that truth of who we really are and what we got, because we've got a lot that we need to be able to open our heart to. Thank you, Papa.
A few weeks ago, we talked about being a child of God, but we talked about it from the angle of the prodigal son. But, as we were talking through this, Dad, I felt like there's some other passages in the Bible that talk about being born again. There's passages about being adopted. And to me, when I was thinking, okay, so what does it mean to be born? Or what does it mean to be adopted? And these were the words that just, God kind of put on my heart to share today. When we're born, we're connected by blood. All right. And then adoption, we're connected by choice, like you said, and payment. So think of it this way. Blood carries genetics and DNA material. It connects us to our biological parents, and it makes us biological sons or daughters. Well, Jesus Christ shed his blood to cover our sins. His blood connects us to God, and it makes us a biological son or daughter.
Wow.
On the other end, as far as adoption, because he uses the illustration of birth, but he also talks about being adopted too. And it says, in order to be adopted, today, someone has to choose you, and they have to pay for you. You are connected by choice and payment. Well, God chose to send his son, Jesus Christ, to pay the price of death with his son's life. It's through his choice and payment that we were adopted as sons and daughters. So to me, when we're sitting here talking about identity, we got to understand that, because we're children, it's not just, we're children of God. I mean, there's value and worth. I mean, there was a choice, there was a payment, there was blood spilt to connect us to him. And in him, we have this identity that allows us to stand firm. Well, kind of a side note, Dad, and it really, I was talking to my buddy a few weeks back, and God really just put this on my heart, and I feel like it fits into this quarter. So, um, what God kind of put on my heart was, you know, there's all different types of identity that we can we can find throughout Scripture that we have in Christ, and we've covered a lot of them, and we're going to cover so much more. But God really simplified it for me the other day, Dad. And he made me, and he brought me back to really our first podcast when I was sharing my testimony, and I was talking about I put my identity in things that are temporary, such as I built my house on sand, as opposed to building my house on the rock. And what God showed me is, the eternal rock, or that identity that allows us to stand firm, in which we can build our house, it's ultimately on this one truth, and it's His love. Everything we just mentioned, Dad, and we just talked about, if you really dive into it and dig deeper, I think it connects back to His love. His love is our identity that cannot be moved. I mean, I can't quote it perfectly, but it says there's no angels, no demons, no depth, no height that can separate us from the love of God. Mm. So that's that rock that we can build our house on. It's His love. So everything. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Oh, just everything that we're talking about, being seen, searched, and known, for instance. What is that? That's His love pursuing us, right? To get to know us. He created us, and He called us very good through His creation. And He's created us fearfully and wonderfully. He has made us holy and blameless. He has done those things out of His love. He has made us a child, whether by born or by adoption. That is all love. He's called us a masterpiece, but He also wants to take time to work on us with making us a workmanship. Well, that's His love, to dive in and get His hands dirty and mold us and work on us. But that just blew me away, and it simplified it for me, Dad. It made me real excited that what I hang my hat on, what I put my hope in, is not my perfection. It's that His love's always going to come through.
It's amazing what you said when you were talking earlier about, His blood and His payment. And I thought He really covered all the bases. There are no excuses. There's not a loophole out there that you can miss. I mean, I guess we can totally reject that truth, but again, that doesn't change that it's true. Mm-hmm. He's done it. There's a reason that He said what? It is finished.
Yeah.
He finished it. And now if we would just believe that it's finished, we can experience all that it has for us. And then when you talked about the love being the foundation of our identity, I think of my own personal journey. And I always tell people, I'm embarrassed almost to admit it, but for my almost 40 years of what I would say I was a Christian in my old terminology, probably 35 of those or 30 of those, I would say, oh yeah, I believe God loved me. And I might even quote John 3:16 for you. But it's really been the last probably 5 to 8 years that I can honestly look in the mirror, which is where it counts, to my own self. And I can say, you know what? I know God loves me. He is love. That's His essence. And that He's good.
Yeah.
And so what you just said really is, coming to that point of, do you really believe? Do our listeners, do you really believe what God said and that He loves you? That's the key.
Wow. Well, that finishes up our first quarter. That was, I really enjoyed that conversation, Dad.
Probably could just stop right there and go home, Austin. I mean, I don't know what else. That takes some time to digest. I think Mom's going to chew on that for a little bit now. You know, I like to tease Mom. She's our key listener, so we're just giving a little shout out to our fan.
But so anyways, let's move on to our second quarter. And we were, you know, obviously we told you in the beginning that we're going to talk about hearing, right? Hearing differently. But in the second quarter, we wanted to kind of talk about kind of some of the things that keep us from, or some of the ways that we hear now. So I decided to title this Worldly Frequencies. Now, we're not actually going to start with that, and we'll continue to dig into what that means later. But the title of the second quarter would be Worldly Frequencies. So the question is, before we discuss that, is what is the purpose of seeing or hearing differently in the kingdom? Because last time we talked about seeing, and this time we're talking about hearing. Well, why is that so important? Why are we wasting our time talking about this? Well, you know, I believe, you know, what God put on my heart recently was the reason we talk about this is because it's all about the purpose is to get to people's heart.
Yes.
You know, I looked at 3 different verses. 2 of them obviously connect it. The third one's a little bit vague, but I'll explain it here in a second. But, you know, the first one is 1 Samuel 16:7, and this is when Samuel comes and is selecting who's going to be the next king of Israel. And he goes through all the brothers, and he gets down to the shepherd who's out in the field, who's the youngest, and he anoints him as king because the Lord tells him. And it tells us in this verse, it says, "For the Lord sees not as man sees. For a man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." See, if God looks at people's heart, I believe that that's where the way the kingdom functions. We're called to look at people's hearts. So that's kind of referring back to what we talked about last time, seeing differently, right? We want to see so we can get to their heart. Well, in Matthew 12:34, you know, the second part of that verse, it says, "For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." So when we hear, we have a chance to hear what's happening in the heart. Then we have a Matthew 11:15. It says, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Now, obviously, it doesn't mention anything about the heart there, but as I sat and thought about it, what it's trying to get you to say is we all hear, but there's something deeper we got to be digging to because there's more than just to hear. I mean, you got to dig, and there's another aspect of hearing, which I would say is getting to the heart. By seeing and hearing differently, it allows us to understand the state of the heart. You know, is the heart healthy? Is it lost? Or maybe is it hard? See, I believe that we're called to respond with His love according to the heart state. See, you know, and I'm sure I'm guilty of this too, is like a lot of times we like to put love in a box. Well, just like we can't put God in a box, we can't put love in a box. Because love sometimes looks like a big hug and a big kiss. But sometimes love is it's a hard truth. Or it's a challenging of someone. But what makes it of the kingdom would be you have first seen and known the heart, and the Spirit leads you in what kind of love, what angle are you going to bring His love to speak the truth to their heart.
You know, Austin, I think it's always relevant if we can give practical examples to our listeners of maybe things that we have walked through, whether it be good or bad, whether we've messed it up or did well, and just look at, you know, okay, so how's this practical? And before I get into some examples for us just to kick around and have our listeners think through with us, I think of the example we talked about a couple weeks ago of Caleb and Joshua, as they looked at with the other 10 spies. All 12 people saw the same thing, and yet 2 of them said, let's go take the land. Well, then there's a part in the scripture there where it says that Caleb followed God wholeheartedly. Mm. What does it say about David? He's a man after God's what?
Own heart.
And we know the mess that David made of his life. So David and Caleb are just 2 great examples of people that are after Papa's own heart. So now you bring it to us and you say, okay, so how do we reach the heart in our day-to-day life? And I just thought of simple examples that have been a part of my life, experiences that have come about. Some of them I'm sure are very similar to you. And I think of Jesus, first of all, because again, he's the perfect manifestation of the Father. Jesus says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So I would think he's the model. You and I talk a lot about what, leadership models, one of his first steps. And how did he do it? He walked along the way. Well, what did that mean? You don't see Jesus setting out a bunch to say, hey, I'm going to go talk to the 5,000. It just happens naturally. But the key to him walking along the way that I see, he saw and he heard. Just what you talked about. Jesus often says he saw and he heard. And then what did he do? He responded. So my encouragement to you and I and our listeners is, as we walk along the way, ask Papa to help us to see and to hear from our heart so that we can respond when we hear other people's hearts. Another simple one is just, I always encourage coaches and remind myself, make home the priority. Hear your wife's heart. The greatest thing that you can do for your children, and you now have 4, is to love mom and to listen to your kids, as Bob Lord, one of our first guests, gave me that advice driving under the tunnel in Dusseldorf, Germany. He said, fall in love with your wife every day and listen to your kids. Let's listen to their heart. We'll get into listening later. Then I thought, okay, well, how do you tie it after the home to your staff as a coach? You and I are both coaches. What about those staff conversations, or maybe those game day communications on the headset or on the sideline? Well, listen to your staff. We brought a gentleman in that did a servant leadership program with our staff when I was the head coach at Liberty. And one of the exercises, basically, you gave 10 of your staff members a form to fill out on how they saw you as the leader. And it was interesting. One of the gentlemen put down that the thing that concerned him the most was that every time he met with me, it was in my office. And I thought, what's so big deal about that? Well, what I started to do is every time I met with him from that time on, I'd go to his office. I entered his space. And you would have thought I gave him a $10,000 raise. But see, I heard his heart. Now, it took an exercise, but that moment has changed me to this day. It makes me think about, how am I hearing a person's heart, and how then am I responding to their heart? So maybe you're a coach on the sideline at game day. If you haven't thought about how you're going to handle your staff conversations, or maybe your player conversations, you could have a lot of, button heads on the sideline because you're not in a moment of, urgency in a game. You haven't thought that through. It's not going to probably come out the right way on game day. You're not going to listen to the heart, and you might say something that you shouldn't say. You're going to injure the heart of each other. And then I think of the player, same way. You've heard me say before, encouraging the staff to talk to the players after each week and tell them, what do you do well as what maybe your growth opportunities are, but tell your people what they do well. Sit down and communicate with them, feedback, because again, if you reach their heart, you're going to get the person. And then one of the greatest things that I know was a blessing to Mom and I, and you've heard me talk about it, was our Wednesday night dinners. In my last job as a head coach, we'd gather a position on every Wednesday night during the season and their coach. And the reason we did that was just to get an opportunity outside the lines of the field and allow them to come into our home and to really just minister to each other's hearts, to hear their stories. Some of the things that kids shared were amazing. I'll never forget in our last year there, I won't say the young man's name, but I asked a question. I said, if you could change anything in your life, what would it be? And the young man raised his hand. I was joking. I said, it's not classroom, but and he said, Coach, he said, if I could change anything, I would ask for one dresser. And I hesitated, and I thought I heard him, but I wasn't real sure. I said, one dresser? He said, yep. He said, since I've been little, my mom and dad have been divorced. And he said, I go every other weekend to one of their homes. And he said, if I had one dresser, would be together.
Wow.
And that environment allowed him to share his heart. And so as a coach, that's valuable information of how I can best serve him as a player and help him. Heck, the kid's hurting inside because he feels like, he's got two homes pulling at him. That comes out on the field. Mm. So, what you're talking about, hearing from the heart is really critical. And I think there are many, many practical ways day to day if we're just alert and attentive to the person in front of us, and we're asking Papa to help us to be sensitive to the heart, just like what Jesus saw, he heard, and he responded as he walked along the way of life. And that's what I'd encourage our listeners with. Let me interrupt you for a moment. I'm grateful for the opportunity that I have to do this podcast with my son, Austin. For the last 10 years, Austin and I have had many intimate conversations on his drive home from work. Some of these father-son conversations have been lighthearted, while others have been very deep and emotional. Over the Christmas holidays, we decided to start a podcast called Awaken Kingdom Culture, where we invite our friends to share their life-changing stories with you, our listeners. This podcast is done under our nonprofit, The Win Awakening, a sports ministry network for coaches, athletes, and those who lead. Our vision is to awaken hearts and minds, one story at a time. Our mission is to encourage coaches and athletes and those who lead to live from a place of victory, regardless of success, records, or the scoreboard. Our goal is to create safe environments where transparency and vulnerability are accepted, and value and worth are recognized in an atmosphere of love. Right in the middle of your mess, I'm reminded daily that the most important person of my day is the one in front of me, and that one matters, and that you are the one. WinAwakening.org is our website. I encourage you to visit our website, where you can encounter the good news of who you are in Christ and what you already possess and how to live from it. There you'll find blogs, videos, Andrew's journal, and this podcast, Awaken Kingdom Culture, where hearts and minds come alive, one story at a time. I'm thankful for all of you who have given and are a member of Team Win. Awaken Kingdom Culture is listener supported. And if you'd like to support us, you can go to winawakening.org. We are a nonprofit. I encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And please like, share, and write a review on Spotify or YouTube. Okay, it's time to get back to the podcast.
So now we're going to kind of back up with worldly frequencies. And basically I want you to think about these are things that kind of get their noises or sounds or things that you're hearing that keep you from continuing to pursue and get to a person's heart. So, so once again, what are some of the frequencies that the world uses to distract us from a person's heart? Well, the first one is going to sound a little silly, but it's the truth, is the actual words that come out of a person's mouth.
Mm.
I mean, sometimes we're so concerned about the words coming out of their mouth being perfect that we sit there expecting, anticipating, waiting. Another way to put it is kind of like a crouched lion ready to pounce. Dad, I mean, you and I have both kind of talked about it here, but you know, when we left Liberty, we had some church hurt, and it took us a while to get back into church. And one of the things I'm not proud of, but is the truth, is I would go into church and sit in on the service, and I would be like that crouched lion ready to pounce. I'd be listening for the one or two words or the phrases that would get me to cancel or to edit or to critique the words of the pastor. And what I was doing is I didn't give the chance to get to the person's heart because I was so concerned about the exact word coming out of the mouth and whether I liked it or not.
Mm.
I mean, to be honest, I was judging every word. Is it right? Is it wrong? Which you just talked about. It's from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right?
That's right.
And I was saying, does it align with what I believe? I was critical. I would sit there and critique, and I would look to discredit and disqualify. I was trying to prove how right I was. James 1:19, it says, "Know this, my beloved brother, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger." It's calling us to respond slow. Why? So we don't just hear the words, we dig deeper and hear the heart. Because if you respond slow, you might find out what they're saying is maybe not what they're really trying to communicate. You know, another thought along those lines is I think of the analogy of writing a paper, Dad. You know, when I was in English class and we'd have to write a paper, you'd have different parts of the process. There was something called a rough draft and a final draft, right? The final draft is what you got graded on, right? And, you know, your grammar, the content, all that stuff based on the rubric. Well, we treat what comes out of people's mouth almost like it's a final draft all the time. On the flip side, before we got to the final draft, we had rough drafts, which was in process. You could get correction, but it wasn't going to, you weren't going to get counted against it for any mistakes you had in there. You know, it was kind of collaborative, something that you could grow from. Well, I believe we're all in process. We're all in different parts of our story and journey, and we're rough drafts. So why do we treat people's words like they're final drafts? Like what's coming out of their mouth is, you know, the gospel essentially, and we give them no room, no grace to screw up with what they say. You know, another verse is Ecclesiastes 7:21 through 22. It says, "Do not pay attention to every word people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you, for you know in your heart that many times you yourself have cursed others." It kind of puts it back on you. It's like it's sitting there saying, don't you remember that you've put your foot in your mouth or you've said things that you wish you took back? Don't you wish you got grace in those moments? So why don't you give it to other people? So don't hang on every word that they say. So that is one of those frequencies that, hey, gets us to cancel people or stop hearing people, and we never get to their heart because we're so worried about their words being perfect. Another thing is what I'm going to call noise. You know, I like to think of like, because I'm a quarterback or a coach, and I've been in loud stadiums. Not so much Eastern Michigan, Dad. There was like 25 people in the stands, but you know, but I've been in some loud stadiums, and it was the people would, you know, in loud stadium it's hard to hear. Well, there's a bunch of noise. Well, what are some things that, so how does that look like? How would that be a worldly frequency that keeps us from a person's heart? Well, one of those noises would be performance. You know, you know, how was it said? How did they say it perfectly or fluidly? Was their volume too, or was it good enough, or was it too soft? You know, how was the presentation? Did they do something that got you to lose focus of what they're really trying to say? You know, Dad, if I'm being honest, like a perfect example of this is the other day we interviewed our guest, right? Matt Sherwood. Well, Matt Sherwood had an amazing story, an absolutely amazing story, and God is doing amazing things in him. But, you know, because he could not see, he's halfway on the screen. And to be honest, we couldn't really tell when we're sitting there talking to him, you know, because our screens don't show the exact same thing. So we're sitting there and he's telling his story, and on the screen you see half of Matt. My fear is that people canceled or did not hear the great story that he had because we didn't catch it, that he was not completely on the screen. Do we listen to the noise of the presentation and miss out on the heart and the beauty of people's story? Another thing that would be noise is perception. The rumblings of others. We get so worried about what other people are saying or thinking that we end up not hearing that person's heart because we're worried about what other people think if I join in and try to listen and care about them. Or the other type of noise that I might hear is my own opinions. I to be honest, if I'm being real, Dad, I struggle with this one because I'm actually, when I listen, I kind of rehearse my response in my head. You know, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say in response, and I stop listening to really what's that person is saying. You know, and then I go to this verse, Proverbs 18:2, and it humbles me. It says, "A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion." You know, we forget that the whole purpose is understanding the heart, and we're just worried about getting our opinion out.
I think a lot of people struggle with that because, again, we want to be right. And that's back to that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You made me think of a couple things as well. I think expectations keeps us from listening to the heart. You know, in football, whether it be your team or your positional standards, that transactional environment, right? Where it's, what can you do for me? You do this, I'll do that. So we live under expectations and we miss the heart of people. Here's one that's, I know all the time coaches give you this one. I don't have time. Time. Well, the last time I checked, each one of us was given 86,400 seconds a day. So where are you going to spend it? You know, where's your priority? And I think one of the things that's helped me is, you know, learning to be mindful and even to meditate or contemplate, putting aside some time to talk to Papa, but more importantly, to listen to Papa, because we do the same thing in a relationship with him. Think about all the time people pray. Prayer is most of the time people talking and very little listening. I think it should be, it's flipped is what I'm learning. Are we listening to the heart of Papa? So time is an issue. Sometimes it's perceptions and prejudices, right? Think about in football, a young man can walk into a building and they'll say, oh, he's a football player. Well, why did they have to say that? So there's perceptions and prejudice that that I think keep us from the heart. Outward appearances, preconceived ideas, those are all things what, we face in our culture today. And then how about this? Personal junk, right? Our own sin keeps us from the heart of people. Forget about their sin. It's the way sometimes we focus on our stuff.
Mm.
And then I have a friend, Steve McVeigh, who calls it the unholy trinity, the pursuit of the unholy trinity, which is prestige, possessions, and power. Keeps us from the heart of people.
Yeah. What are some consequences of editing every word? I think there's consequences for both the hearer and the speaker. For the hearer, I think we tend to cancel or disconnect before you ever get to the heart. I mean, obviously, I've kind of been leaning towards that point, but that happens. Think about it, social media. When someone writes some type of words that someone completely disagrees with or is not, totally accepted in, our culture, it's, sometimes it gets completely wiped out, or what people would say canceled. Well, what's the problem with canceling is there's no chance for growth. And there's no chance for healing because you never get there. You quit. Well, for the speaker, when a speaker feels like every word he's saying is being edited, it's kind of why I was a little leery to do the podcast, Dad. I'm sitting there saying, well, if, I know how I speak, and I'm, sometimes I stutter, sometimes I, it doesn't come out great, or sometimes I mess up what I'm saying. So what do? You protect yourself. You decide, I'm only going to share a version of my heart. I'm going to show you that social mask we talked about, right, Dad?
Right. That's right.
And then we end up silencing, and we don't even give a version. We just silence our heart completely. Well, when you go to the doctors, and you're sitting there and they're giving you your physical, one of the things they do is they pull out their stethoscope. Apologies if I'm saying that wrong. But they put the little earplugs in, and then they take the little thing and they try to find your heartbeat. Well, the sad thing is, if the speaker feels like he's constantly being edited and he stops communicating, when you put that little stethoscope on the chest of the person trying to find the heartbeat, you won't be able to find it. It'll be lost. You won't be able to see what's happening. And the problem with that is, one, you miss out on the true state of the heart. But if we truly believe that God is working in everybody, and He has created everybody uniquely, and everybody has value and worth and something to contribute and a purpose to bring to this earth, we don't get that. We miss out on Papa, is the sad thing, because we don't get to that heart. And once again, the speaker too has no chance of growth or healing if we never get there.
Well, in both scenarios, you really hit on it, but I just want to close out our second quarter by saying this. When we edit people or cancel people, we end up having no conversation. Mm-hmm. And with no conversation, there's no relationship. And no relationship, there's no story. And with no story, there's no heart. We're not at the heart.
Yeah.
And, I think that's the challenge when you start talking about hearing the heart of people. We want to be in good conversation so we can have relationship. And that starts with recognizing the person in front of you. Don't miss the masterpiece of your day. We can't remind each other, and I start with myself about that. That is the purpose of Awaken Kingdom Culture. This podcast is to allow you to share your story.
So right now we're going to kind of transition to halftime, and this time's halftime is not going to be very long. It's just basically taking us from the second quarter, which is worldly frequencies that keep us from getting to the heart, to what kingdom hearing looks like.
So the away band didn't come?
No. This one will be quick.
Short one then.
Yeah. So I just wanted to use the analogy like of an NFL stadium. We kind of referenced it quickly, but think of like I think the Seattle Seahawks have a really loud stadium. So imagine you're surrounded by the 12th man. That's what they call their fans, right? You know, the stadium is so loud. It's just a really noisy stadium, kind of like the World Bowl, Dad, back in '98. You know.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, when you say noisy stadiums, I've been fortunate, been in a lot of them: Ohio State, Michigan, the Coliseum out in L.A., Denver Broncos Stadium, Seattle, Indianapolis. But I got to give a plug for Dusseldorf, Germany, and the Rhine Fire, because you're right, Austin. And then even the World Bowl, which was the biggie down at Frankfurt, what you just mentioned, whistles, road torches, and they don't stop. There is no, well, be quiet when the team's got the ball. No, it's that soccer mentality they have over in Europe, and the louder, the better.
Mm. So anyways, imagine that noisy stadium we just described. Well, in the NFL, quarterbacks, like if you ever look at the back of their helmet, they have a little green dot. That green dot means that they have like a little radio or some type of thing that, you know, the quarterback has inside his helmet where the coach can talk on the headset and communicate the play or something about the play to the quarterback. Well, obviously, if you're in a noisy stadium and there's a lot of, things that are easily to distract your ears, it could be hard to hear that radio. So if you ever look and you see like, I know I found some pictures of like Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady, they would actually have the holes in their helmet that are over their ear holes are covered. And you're like, what? Why'd they do that? Well, the reason they did that is so that they could block out the noise so that they can hear the play that's coming into their helmet so that they can then communicate to their team. Well, as we transition to kingdom hearing, it's the same thing. We want to make that audible, right? We want to be able to block out that worldly frequency that's around us so that we can experience kingdom hearing.
Well, as we start the third quarter, and you mentioned it, we want to talk about then what is kingdom hearing? We've talked about the frequencies and some of the ways that we hinder ourselves from hearing properly or hearing the heart. And when I was thinking about this, Austin, I'm really excited, and we're just going to scratch the surface, but the Spirit's really been speaking a lot to me on this since you've brought this up. And that is, I looked at Luke chapter 8, and that's verses 5 through 9. But the whole chapter there is the story of the sower, the seed, the parable. And, when you start taking things in pieces, it makes a lot of sense. First of all, what is a parable? Well, it's a story. And so you look at Jesus, this is what he says to them before he tells them. He said, listen with your heart. Or another word or way that was said was your inner ears. I liked how that was said when I looked that up. He said, listen with your heart and you will understand. Mm-hmm. And we're going to get into that, right? It's more than just hearing a voice that someone communicates something. It's listening with your heart and you'll understand. And he says, it is how you hear my word that makes all the difference, is what he told those that were listening. So here's the question, I think, for the listeners and for you and I. What are you hearing? What are you hearing? The disciples asked this. They said, well, what deeper meaning, Jesus, is found in this parable? And Jesus' response was this. He said, you have been given a teachable heart, one that's humble and open to the truth, to perceive the secret, hidden mysteries of God's kingdom. But to those who don't have a listening heart, my words are merely stories or parables. Even though they have eyes, they're blind to the true meaning of what I say. And even though they listen, they won't receive the full revelation. So hearing from the heart and listening to the heart is the statement that I want our listeners to really remember as I give a quick synopsis of this parable. So in Luke, it talks about the story of the seed or the sower. The seed is the word. It's Jesus. And here's what really excited me. The question is, how do you and I approach each soil? Because each soil is a person's heart. And you look in Luke chapter 8, they talk as it's coming from the viewpoint of the farmer. In Luke 15, it comes from the viewpoint of the shepherd and the sheep, the woman in the coin, the father and the two sons. And then you heard me talk about this last time in John 15, we see it from the vine dresser, the viewpoint of the vine dresser. So let's talk about the four soils for a second. First of all, as we said, the seed, it's the word of God. And it's the word that's been sown into the soil or into our hearts. The word is God's living expression to us. It's Papa's conversation with mankind. He says that my sheep know my voice. Think about it. It's no mistake that God has Jesus called the Word, because Jesus is what? His voice to us. So you look at the four soils. The first, it says the road or the hard pathway. And that is, they hear the word, but their hearts are hard. The truth, that word that was sown to them, their identity is stolen from their heart before it ever gets to them. They're trapped in unbelief. See, they perceive how Papa sees them, but it's not firm in their heart. So the question again is to me and you, how do you approach a person with a hard heart? The second soil is the rocky soil or the gravel. And this is where they hear the word momentarily, but the hearts are shallow. They hear and receive with great joy, and they believe, but the belief is temporary. A temptation or maybe a trial comes their way. There's no root in the truth. And again, what's the truth? It's back to our first thing we've talked about. It's identity. There's no root in their identity. So there's no anchor. So how do you and I approach a person with a shallow heart? Then you have the third type of soil, which is the thorny bushes, the weeds, right? We get lost in the weeds. Here's where the person hears the word, but their hearts are crowded. There's no heart growth because of the distractions of life. They're future tripping, or that unholy trinity we talked about. There's worry or fear or that prestige, possessions, and power that they're trying to find out and search out for their life, thinking that's where their identity exists. So how do you and I approach that person with the crowded heart? So we have the heart that's hard, which we encounter those every day. We have the hearts that are shallow, that have maybe heard that word, but doesn't last. And we have the hearts that I'm too busy. I'm crowded. And then you have the last soil, which is the good, fertile soil, where you hear the word, and within their heart, there's fruit. They live from the truth. They trust in that identity that we have, that we are seen, known. There's an intimacy and a love. They experience wholeness. That truth of being matches the way of their being, as our friend Paul Young would say. And they bear fruit. Why? Because they're attached to the source, right? The vine is attached, the branch is attached to the vine. There's that understanding of union. So here's the reminder. Kingdom coaches, kingdom leaders, listen from the heart to reach the heart.
So now we're going to transition to kingdom hearing. You know, kingdom hearing, there's really three words I want you to think about. The first one being listening, second discerning, and then finally understanding.
You mentioned listen. Right away, it makes me think of my good friend, Bruce Bickle, mentor of mine. He used to always say, Ken, say a little and listen a lot. a lot like the verse you read earlier in James 1:19.
Yeah. Well, when I'm thinking of listening, for me, it's like it's here. It's the difference between hearing versus listening. Hearing's like that external sense. Like obviously, we hear the audible noise, right? Where listening is an internal skill, where you not only hear that noise, but then you're able to take it further and like we said, it's going to talk about discern and then understand really what's being communicated. Like I said, I mean, there's a difference between, well, we have to understand there's difference between what people say sometimes and then what they actually end up, what they're trying to say. The reason I know that, Dad, is because that's how I am. Sometimes I don't say exactly what I'm trying to communicate. I'd like to, but sometimes it's trapped in there and I can't get it out the way I want it said, and it's frustrating. So when you come across a really good listener and they're able to draw it out of you, that's pretty special, because everyone wants to be seen, searched, and known. They just don't enjoy the process of getting there.
We talk. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dad. Go ahead.
No, you made me think about, and I think you're getting to it. I might jump the gun on you a little bit, but active listening. And I think about, I heard this quote. It says, it's not active listening, which you just described to me, is not just hearing what someone says. It involves making sure the other person feels heard, understood, and valued. There's a quote that says, I've learned that other people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you make them feel.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's what you made me think of when you just shared that. Truly listening to somebody.
Yeah. Like you said, active listening, it's an attention commitment. I mean, you're truly committing to focus, like you've always said, focus, intent, elevate desire. I mean, you are committing certain things to that person that you're listening to. For instance, obviously you commit your ears, right? I have a couple verses. Psalm 130, 1-2. It says, "Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. O Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my pleas for mercy." See, the sad thing is we don't actually say, "Hey, I need mercy." We say things that hopefully people pick up on. Hey, I want some mercy. And that's what like this verse is talking about, is like, Lord, with your ears be attentive to more than just what I'm saying. Hear my pleas for mercy. Mark 4:24, it says, "And he said to them, pay attention to what you hear. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you, and still more will be added to you." So one of the ways we commit our attention is through our ears. Another way is through our eyes. Like you always taught me growing up, Dad, look people in the eyes, give them eye contact. But even deeper than that, when we give them their eyes, we're paying attention. We have the ability to pay attention to their nonverbal cues, because we can get to their heart many different ways. Like we've talked about seeing, but also hearing. And as people are talking, you can see nonverbal cues that can help communicate and connect you to their heart. We also have to commit our minds. We have to engage in discerning, and understanding happens in our mind. We got to get our mind involved with what's being communicated. It's part of being active. Also our emotions. You know, when if we just sit here and, I know we can sometimes, keep a pretty straight face and, sometimes not show our emotion very well. But, being able to show empathy and to show care and to smile when things are, that connects people and that opens people up when you can, share your emotions, engage with what they're trying to communicate. It can also, you can pick up through their emotions, their nonverbal cues, what they're trying to say. And then finally, we got to commit our time. And this is, as coaches, this is probably the most challenging thing, because we always feel like there's never enough time. But we're in the business of people. And when you're in the business of people, people take time. We can't rush through it. We want to just flip the switch and people be fixed. But unfortunately, and God knows this, and he's the best at this, is it takes patience to get to a person's heart. In Micah 7:7, it says, but as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. There's this patience of waiting that's associated with being heard. Some other things, besides just active listening, is you have to have a strong identity. It takes a strong identity to listen to someone, because you got to remove yourself. A lot of times we're worried about, how we're being perceived, and, maybe what they're saying that maybe isn't saying something good about me. And I don't want to listen to what's being said. Kind of like your description of coming to my, well, we always come to your office. Well, you could have not listened to that, but because, it didn't feel good hearing that. You want to hear positive things. But it takes a strong identity to say, I'm in process. And also, I understand who I am in Christ. And that frees you up to then really listen to other people. Another thing is no condemnation. Create safe environments, right? And that's the beauty of Jesus, is like we talked about with seeing. He was compassionate and merciful. And those things drew people to him and opened them up. That's where they were able to share their heart. And that's where he was able to restore and heal them, when they shared it. So, when we condemn people, people don't want to come and they don't want to say things. But a good listener, create safe environment for people to speak. The next thing after listening is discerning. Kingdom hearers discern. A discerning listener never interrupts. They don't switch topics too fast. They're intentional and informative. They ask intentional and informative questions, and they restate answers. They ask questions like, what, why, when, where, how?
The two big questions in our ministry, right? We always ask people. We have it on our website. It's the
second podcast.
It's the questions I love to ask people, because how are you? And that's a big question that has been in my life from the start of when that lady one day said horrible. And I thought how awesome that was. And then the next one is, who's taking care of you? Now, these are questions that, we need to ask each other, and we need to be able to answer for each other.
Yeah. And these questions allow us to dig deeper. And when we dig deeper, that's when we get to the real problems. We get to the root of the things that are coming out. The other thing we in discerning is this happens through the Holy Spirit. Obviously we're talking about some of these symptoms of what Christ in you looks like. So we're talking about listening, discerning, and understanding. Well, this happens ultimately through the Spirit. He's the one that can interpret what people are really trying to communicate, even to the point if they're moaning or groaning. I mean, obviously there's some verses like, for instance, Psalm 5, 1-2, it says, give ear to my words, O Lord. Consider my groaning. Give attention to the sound of my cry, my King and my God, for to you do I pray. Romans 8:26, likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what to pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groaning too deep for words. The Holy Spirit can help us discern what is really trying to be said. And that's really part of living out of the kingdom, is living out of that his Spirit. And then finally, so we've listened, discerned. A kingdom hearer understands. To understand is another way to say it is to know. And like you said earlier, Dad, being known is just not a knowledge. It's relational. It's intimate. You know, where hearing is kind of just editing or judging someone, listening is understanding their heart, why they're saying what they're saying. Why is that coming out of their heart? What thoughts are going through their head? What are they feeling? See, in Proverbs 20:5, it says, the purpose in a man's heart is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out. And when I found this verse, Dad, I immediately thought of you, because you've always used the term draw it out, you know?
Well, I think that's our role as a coach. You know, we spend so much time both in the Christian world. We use the word discipleship, and I think sometimes that can be confusing because we're basically saying, you don't have what I have. I'm going to disciple you and put it in you and help you, get to where I'm at. Well, I'd like to flip it even as a coach. It's not about what a player lacks. It's about what he has. And I know I've had to grow in that in my life. I wasn't very good at that early in my career. But now being able to look at players, look at people, and say, let's take a minute to draw out what Papa's already put in, because it's already within. It's just awakening to that fact and living from it.
See, when we understand people, what does that produce? Well, it can produce physical healing. When you understand what's going on, it can produce physical healing. It can produce emotional healing or social healing or even spiritual restoration. So as a kingdom hearer, it is important that we take the time to not only hear what's being said, it's to take the time to listen, discern, and understand the heart. Because once you get to the heart, that's really where, I'm going to say the magic, but it's where God takes over.
Well, we got our 2-minute drill now, Austin. Fourth quarter, 2 minutes to go.
All right. So, a kingdom coach. So we talked about a kingdom here, right? Well, how does a kingdom coach hear differently? Well, let's apply everything we just talked about as far as a kingdom hearer to a coach. A kingdom coach listens to discern and understand their players when others just hear their words. You block out time and noise to listen to their heart. You hear what's being communicated and you evaluate it, but you recognize that words are just a symptom of their process. So you listen to their heart, thoughts, and feelings of each of your players, and you interpret their moans and groans, which is what they really desire to communicate. A kingdom coach hears the state of the heart and responds with God's love.
Wow. I don't know about our listeners, but this has been a somewhat of a challenging conversation for me, even though I'm at the end of my career of coaching, but I think it's very relatable just to any relationship we have. And so as we close for today, there's a couple things I just want to remind our listeners that kingdom is Christ-centered dominion in all aspects of life. Kingdom coaches and leaders, they understand their true identity. And they think differently. They see differently. And as we saw today, they hear differently. There's a famous poem, and I'm just going to read one section of it, by Charles Finn. And it's called, Please Hear What I'm Not Saying. It says in about the third stanza, it says, I idly chatter to you in the suave tones of superficial talk. I tell you everything that's really nothing, and nothing of what's everything, of what's crying within me. So when I'm going through my routine, do not be fooled by what I'm saying. Please listen carefully and try to hear what I'm not saying. What I'd like to be able to say, what for survival I need to say, but what I can't say. Who am I? You may wonder. I am someone you know very well. For I am every man you meet, and I'm every woman you meet.
Wow.
So thanks for joining us today at Awaken Kingdom Culture, where hearts and minds come alive, one story at a time.